that I gave in this chamber was about a conflict of interest report for a Liberal member. Today, this member got to give her speech on the topic of the day, at least anyway, is on government corruption, government scandal. We see people that are taking taxpayers' money to further their own personal interests. She spoke very well about the issues that people are going through in her own riding. I'm just wondering if she could talk about how unfortunate it is that for her maiden speech we're talking about government corruption and scandal rather than ways that we could be furthering the country, much like I was when I gave my first speech in the House.
Question.
The honourable member for Elmwood Transcona.
I thank the member for his question. The reality is, I just want to be a strong voice for Canadians and the people of my riding of Elmwood Transcona. And as much as I've enjoyed being here, we need to just move forward. We need to get back to government work and make things happen. And I'll keep repeating that over and over again. We need to make things happen for Canadians because they are desperate to have stuff happen where that they can see an actual impact. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for London Fanshawe.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I also truly enjoyed the member from Elmwood Transcona speech. I've now known her a few weeks and have come to really appreciate her as a very genuine, caring member of Parliament, and I know that her constituents will truly appreciate that going forward as their representative. One of the things that she and I spoke about, and I would love to hear her further comment on this now, is on the campaign trail. She visited with some folks who were on the picket lines, and what it meant that she was there with them, what it meant that there are people in this place that are fighting for their collective bargaining rights, and how that's a big part of her community, and what she heard from them directly on that line. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
A brief answer from the honourable member for Elmwood Transcona.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I did have the chance to walk the line with Teamsters during the campaign, which is near and dear to my heart because my dad was from the same union, my brother now, so I had the chance to walk with my brother. I actually remember in 2008 walking with my son and my dad. And so it was great to be able to walk with those workers and hear their stories and their concerns about safety issues and those types of things that they have to think about day in and day out, and the ability to come home safe to their families. Over the weekend, had a chance to walk with the Canada Postal workers in my riding who have the potential of going on strike. So that's something that is very near and dear to my heart. I just want to continue to be able to fight for workers across Canada, and most specifically in my riding of Elmwood Transcona.
Here, here, here.
Statements by members, déclaration de députés.
All right, statements time.
The honourable member for Thunder Bay, Rainy River.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to rise today to recognize and honour the life of a good Canadian, Michael Robert Elchuk, who everybody knew simply as Hoss. Like the Bonanza character, Hoss was a gentle giant of a man. A good Ukrainian boy, he grew up on a farm in Murillo. Hoss loved cooking. He worked as a chef in Europe and various places in Canada before returning home to open up his own restaurant. Hoss was a volunteer in a wide variety of community activities, none more importantly than his role as a volunteer firefighter with the Oliver Papoonge Fire and First Response. That's where I first met him years ago when he brought someone into the emergency room while performing CPR on them. That was Hoss, always helping others. That's why he was such a beloved member of the community and why he'll be missed by so many people from Murillo, from Kekabeka, and from Thunder Bay. But most of all, he'll be missed by his loving family, his mother Betty, his sister Jean, and his brother Dennis. Thanks, Hoss.
The honourable member for Portage Lisgar.
November is Diabetes Awareness Month, and this week my wife Kaylee and I met with Breakthrough T1D, formerly known as JDRF Canada, to discuss the challenges of living with type 1 diabetes. T1D is a chronic autoimmune disease that prevents the body from producing insulin. Kaylee was diagnosed just after her first birthday, and over the years we've witnessed remarkable advancements in treatment. In our meeting, two youth advocates, Sophia and Bennett, shared the daily struggles of managing blood sugar and what a cure would mean for them. They also spoke about promising research underway, including cell therapy, a treatment that could offer insulin independence by replacing damaged cells. Canada's own Frederick Banting and Charles Best revolutionized care for T1D by discovering insulin, saving millions of lives. Today, Canadian researchers are on the verge of another breakthrough, one that could change the future for the hundreds of thousands of Canadians that currently live with T1D. Insulin was discovered here in Canada, and I have no doubt that our brightest minds will continue to lead the way towards finding a cure. Thankfully, the future is hopeful for all those affected by type 1 diabetes.
Bravo. The honourable member for Fredericton.
Mr. Speaker, I remember the first time I visited the office of the Premier of New Brunswick. I was met with a wall of framed portraits, not dissimilar to this House, where all the faces represented were men. Times have changed, Mr. Speaker, and a glass ceiling has been shattered. It is a privilege to congratulate New Brunswick's first woman Premier, Susan Holt, and the Liberal Party of NB on their recent victory in the provincial election. Hear, hear. This historic milestone is not only a significant personal achievement for Premier Holt, but a monumental step forward for all New Brunswickers and indeed all women and girls in our province. Premier Holt's new role changes the game in so many ways. Not only is she determined and hopeful for our future, but her hard work and passion for her province and community inspire us all. This is a collaborative moment that everyone in our province can bask in and be a part of, something truly unforgettable. As a determined leader, a fantastic mother, she understands the struggles and needs of families across the province. I want to thank all involved in this transformational moment, as well as Premier Holt and her family for stepping up when we needed them most. It's a new dawn in New Brunswick, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During this Veterans Week, after paying tribute last week to those who participated in 2 world wars and the Korea War, I'd like to pay tribute to modern veterans, people who are all too often forgotten. These men and women have overcome considerable challenges, whether it's on the battlefield or in terms of peacekeeping or in responding to natural disasters. Their services go well beyond conflict regions, and their contributions are crucial to the security and well-being of communities across the world. They have sacrificed their health and efforts and missed key moments in their personal lives to defend the values of peace and to defend our freedom that is so precious. Now it is up to us, Mr. Speaker, to take care of them and to ensure that they have access to health care that is adequate and to provide support when they return to the labour force. Thank you for your service, dear heroes.
The honourable member from Richmond Hill.
Mr. Speaker, today on November 7th, we remember and honour the sacrifices of Chinese railroad workers who, against extraordinary hardship, helped to build Canadian Pacific Railway. This railway was essential to Canada's Confederation, ensuring British Columbia's entry and connecting our nation from coast to coast. This date makes the completion of the railway in 1885 a feat that would have been impossible without the efforts of over 17,000 Chinese workers who faced grueling conditions, low wages, and unfair treatment, risking and giving their lives to bringing this national vision to life. Their contribution, often overlooked, are a cornerstone of our shared history. Already proclaimed by cities of Toronto, Edmonton, and Ottawa, we commit to ensuring that this day will be officially recognized as Chinese Railroad Workers National Memorial Day across Canada, preserving their legacy in our national memory. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chinese National Railroad Workers Day.
The honourable member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, the Green Slush Fund scandal is growing again. Yesterday's Journal de Montreal revealed that the Minister of the Environment has interests in a Montreal investment firm that benefited from the Green Fund money. From 2020 to 2021, $10.4 million in federal money was paid to 4 companies in which the minister has personal interests. The more you look, the more you find close ties between the Green Slush Fund and Liberal insiders. But now we're moving to a new level. These funds are going directly to the minister's financial interests. Mr. Speaker, this scandal shows a Liberal ploy to pay money for themselves instead of fighting for the environment as the Green Fund was supposed to do. Canadians from coast to coast are disillusioned with this Liberal government and want an election as soon as possible to cut the taxes, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime.
The honourable member from Yukon.
Mr. Speaker, courage, solidarity, giving and hope. These are the values that members of UK, the Ukrainian-Canadian Association of Yukon, are showing as they embark on a heroic journey to deliver medical supplies to the front line of Ukraine's fight against Putin's ruthless and illegal invasion. 4 dedicated individuals, Grant Zazula, Lesia Nachu, Anastasia Matlashevska, and Eileen Melnichuk will carry over 20 suitcases to Ukraine filled with everything from antibiotics to first aid supply to warm socks. Thank you to each Yukoner who has contributed, as well as all the volunteers who have worked tirelessly to gather resources and support for this mission. Thank you, UK, for standing with Ukraine during these challenging times. Indeed, it is incumbent on all of us to act against the dark forces that threaten democracy and work together towards the peace that the world so desperately needs. Safe travels and success to the team. May your journey bring hope and healing to those who need it most. Slava Ukraini.
The honourable member from Winnipeg South.
Mr. Speaker, as the Member of Parliament for Winnipeg South, I am proud to represent a large and growing Indo-Canadian community where Sikh and Hindu families live side by side in harmony as neighbours. Unfortunately, there are those who seek to promote extreme views, create division, and sow discord. Let me be clear. There should never be disruptive protests at places of worship like we saw recently in Brampton and Vancouver. The defacing of Hindu temples, as we have regrettably seen at the Baps Mandirs in Toronto and Edmonton, is absolutely unacceptable. As well, inflammatory statements and incidents of great violence targeting Sikh Canadians have no place in our country. Acts of hate and the creation of disharmony do not reflect the Canada we know and love, a multicultural mosaic that is the envy of the world. In Winnipeg South and beyond, Mr. Speaker, let us work hard to foster unity, keep communities members safe, live together in peace, and build a better Canada for all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Saskatoon University.
Love it or list it. When the Prime Minister's old media buddy, Tom Clark, got to New York, he was disgusted with the 2,700 square foot cramped penthouse condo on Park Avenue with only 12 rooms and 5 bedrooms. Tom took one look at the dump and called his friend the Prime Minister and demanded that this property be listed. What's on Tom Clark's must-have for his New York penthouse condo? Well, Italian marble, of course, a handcrafted copper soaker tub, a $5,000 coffee machine, and yes, even a golf simulator. I'm sure the Prime Minister's media buddy, Tom Clark, loves his new $9 million penthouse condo, but ask anyone who's living in the 1,400 homeless tent encampments in Toronto, or the millions of Canadians that can't afford a home. Right. You know what they say? List it.
Yeah. Well done, Corey.
The honourable member from Hamilton Mountain.
This Veterans Week, I want to thank all those who have served and all those who continue to serve in the defense of our country. 2 weeks ago, we marked 10 years since Corporal Nathan Cirillo was senselessly gunned down while on sentry duty in Ottawa at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier.
Oh, yeah.
That morning, I walked over to the War Memorial to pay my respects to this brave Hamiltonian, a Class A reservist of the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, and I was flooded with memories from the day he died when I spoke with many Hamiltonians in my capacity as a journalist, and the anguish was intense across the city. When I arrived at the memorial, I found myself amid a throng of Argylls from Hamilton here in Ottawa to continue their duty. Some of them had been close to Corporal Cirillo and knew him well. Again, we were overcome with emotion. Hamilton will never forget, Speaker. I want to thank the Argylls for their ongoing service to our country, and I look forward to seeing them again on Sunday for the Garrison Parade.
The honourable member from Regina Leuven.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 long years of these NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time's up. The Prime Minister has taken his anti-energy crusade to a whole new level after recently announcing his oil and gas production cut. This job-killing policy will result in sending jobs to the United States along with $700 million that will go to build pipelines in America. The NDP Liberals are creating more powerful paychecks. Unfortunately, it is for U.S. oil workers, steel workers, and truck drivers. The government's own analysis admits that their cap on production will cost thousands of jobs and billions of dollars, destroying Canadian paychecks. Here at home, Canadian workers are getting poorer and can't afford to put food on the table or a roof over their heads. The NDP Liberals have no plan for the environment, and their cap on production will only perpetuate the economic vandalism they've caused. It's time for a carbon tax election now.
The honourable member from Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
Mr. Speaker, my constituents have told me in no uncertain terms that they want a carbon tax election. There is only one person left who prevents that by keeping this Prime Minister in power, and that person is the leader of the NDP. The same leader of the NDP who made a big stunt when he told Canadians he had ripped up his coalition deal with the Liberals. It was a perfectly timed scam on voters in Elmwood, Transcona, right before a by-election. The leader of the NDP even went so far to say, and I quote, "The fact is the Liberals are too weak, too selfish, and too beholden to corporate interests to fight for people," end quote. But if the Liberals are so weak, why has the leader of the NDP voted for the carbon tax over 24 times? Why does he support his inflationary deficits, including wasteful spending like the Prime Minister's Arrive scam app? Why does the leader of the NDP support the Liberals' soft-on-crime policies that have led to a 50% increase in violent crime? Every day this Prime Minister remains in power is because of the leader of the NDP. It's time for the leader of the NDP to stand with Canadians. Instead of this Liberal government, call a carbon tax election.
The honourable member from Surrey Centre.
Mr. Speaker, veterans often see music as a profound way to express themselves and heal from the impacts of military service. That's why last year Veterans Affairs Canada hosted its first ever open mic night. This event brought together veterans, family members, active service members, and music lovers. It was so successful that the idea expanded with events happening across the country, including Victoria, in Montreal later this weekend, and right here in Ottawa tonight. I invite all members of this House to join with us tonight at the Warrant Officers and Sergeants Mess Hall to celebrate the healing power of music. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from London Fanshawe.
November is Lebanese Heritage Month, and I am fortunate to work with many Londoners of Lebanese heritage who make our city better. To name only a few, Mike Ramal, a small business owner in London South, Sergeant Ziad Zabian from the London Police Service, Majida Zabian, a leader from Cedars of Hope, Dr. Munir Al-Qasim, our local imam, Dr. Majid Fiania, a physician in internal medicine, and Nadine Abirad, who works in my office and fights for my constituents every single day. I am so grateful to you all. I've witnessed that Lebanese Canadians always seem to find each other. They share a solidarity that has been built through hardship and war, and they continue to show remarkable resilience and the truest pride in being Lebanese. The Lebanese community is hurting. I see the pain in their eyes every day, and I see the worry about friends and family, and I want them to know that I stand with them. We must never stop demanding a ceasefire for an arms embargo and peace in the region. And while this may hold cold comfort to so many at this time, I hope you will be able to celebrate this Lebanese Heritage Month.
The honourable member for Shefford. While we're looking to Americans to show solidarity with women, let's not forget the Iranian women who are fighting for their rights. Let us keep in our hearts Ayou Darei, the new heroine of the resistance. Confronted by the morality police about wearing the veil, she instead stripped naked in front of misogynist authorities with dignity, pride, and courage before being arrested. Her fate remains unknown, but our thoughts are with her. Our hearts also go out to 16-year-old Arazu Kavari, who took her own life after being harassed for dancing without a hijab. 2 years after Maha Amini's death, Femmes Vie Liberté movement is still burning despite the bloody repression. These women deserve our support in their fight against Islamism and in their fight for freedom. We need to learn lessons about the value of this freedom, which we often take for granted. Let's stand together and be uncompromising. Today, more than ever, women, life, and liberty.
The honourable member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Under these Liberals, well-connected government elite insiders have been pretending to be Indigenous in order to take contracts intended for Indigenous peoples. But up until today, we didn't know just how high the rot went. Today, the Liberals' Indigenous contracting scandal just got a bit randier, with revelations that the company owned by the Liberal minister from Edmonton Centre tried to identify itself as Indigenous in order to get government contracts.
Yeah, I heard about that this morning.
Recall that when text messages came out about someone named Randy directing the affairs of the company in violation of ethics laws, the minister's partner claimed that it was someone else named Randy. He later admitted that was false, but said the references to Randy were the result of autocorrect. In order to help get government contracts, they invented another Randy and they pretended he was Indigenous. Here's the bottom line. Indigenous peoples in Canada have tragically high levels of poverty. This privileged elite minister's fraudulent company tried to grab contracts that the government had promised to Indigenous peoples by pretending to be Indigenous. It has never been more clear that this minister and these Liberals are only in it for themselves.
Yeah. The honourable member, l'honorable député de...
The honourable member for Longueuil, Charlemagne.
Mr. Speaker, as we pause this week to honour the brave men and women who have served our country, I'd like to pay tribute to Private Leonard William Elliott, a Canadian infantry soldier who fought in the First World War. Private Elliott was one of the more than 650,000 Canadians and Newfoundlanders who courageously answered the call to defend the values of freedom and peace in the war that was meant to end all wars, and one of the more than 66,000 who never came home. Mr. Speaker, he was also my great-grandfather. Leonard was killed in action in August 1917 in the Battle of Hill 70, leaving behind a wife and 5 children, among them the 6-month-old daughter he would never meet, my grandmother Edith. Like so many others, he left his home and family, stepping into the unknown to protect a future he would never see. He fought not just for his generation, but for every generation to come. I had the honor of visiting my great-grandfather's grave in northern France in 2017. I was the first family member to do so, 100 years after his death. The solemn promise I made that day was to ensure that his memory and his legacy would live on, lest we forget.
See, that was a generation that would build a country. Men went to war, they came back, and even after the war, paid off all the debt from the war, and look at what our country has turned into now.
Questions orales, oral questions. The honourable member from Regina Capel.
After 9 years of brutal assaults on Canadian energy workers, the Prime Minister just delivered a knockout punch with a production cap on oil and gas development here, which his own department admits will kill jobs and drive investment south of the border. Canadian energy company Enbridge just announced a $700 million project in the U.S. The Prime Minister is creating powerful paychecks for American workers while Canadian workers can't afford their mortgages or food. It's completely baffling why he would kill jobs here just to see them created down south. Is he getting some kind of a commission from the U.S. energy lobby for all the business he's sending them?
A $700 million project.
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Wow. Mr. Speaker, what the member opposite is saying is simply not true. It's a cap on pollution, Mr. Speaker. In fact, production is going to go up 16% by 2030, and companies in Alberta, in the oil sands sectors, are making billion-dollar investment to make sure that workers in Alberta have a future and the energy sector has a future, and we can fight climate change at the same time, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Regina Capel.
It's a cap on production, and his own department says it will kill jobs. And let's listen to something else that their own officials are saying. The Prime Minister's own Environment Commissioner has blasted the carbon tax as a failure. Here's some of his conclusions. Quote, the government has not made sufficient progress to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And quote, Canada remains the worst performer among all member countries of the G7. Every time the Prime Minister makes the carbon tax go up, Canada's climate performance goes down. down. Yet he keeps doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. So why won't he call a carbon tax election so Conservatives can stop his insanity?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party of Canada is talking about climate change. We should note this somewhere in a book because it doesn't happen very often. If only they would talk about the fact that for 10 years they did nothing, which is why we had to pick up the slack from what they... When we came into power, emissions were going to overshoot 2030 by more than 30%, Mr. Speaker. Emissions are down by 8% because of our plan, the lowest emissions in 25 years, no thanks to the Conservative Party.
Encourage all members, please, to not take the floor unless they're recognized by the Speaker. The Honourable Member from Regina Capel.
Pick up the slack. Under their policies, Canada keeps falling on performance indexes. The only thing this carbon tax is doing is making Canadians poorer, and the results are devastating. A damning new report from the Salvation Army shows the human suffering this Prime Minister is inflicting on Canadians. Let's look at the report. First-time users of food banks shot up this year from 43% to 58%, and 1 in 4 parents are eating less so their children can eat. This is in Canada. How can he be so cold-hearted? Why won't he at least let Canadians decide in a carbon tax election?
Well said.
The Honourable Minister for Economic Development in Quebec.
Monsieur le Président, savez-vous qui...
Mr. Speaker, do you know who has an inferiority complex in this place? It's the Conservative Party, because Canada has the lowest inflation. Interest rates are going down. Not only are we helping Canadians in need, we're building housing, we've got the family benefits, and the only ones in this place with an inferiority complex about Canada's economic resiliency is the Conservative Party. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. The Prime Minister, supported by the Bloc, we learned today that our greenhouse gas emissions records are not reliable. And this Prime Minister contributed to doubling the price of food and rent, while at the same time not succeeding in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. They've not met any of their targets. When will the Prime Minister call an election so that we can cut taxes? The Honourable Minister of the Environment. Mr. Speaker, you're going to have to put this on your calendar. The Conservatives have raised the question of climate change. They did nothing while they were in office. Nothing for energy efficiency, nothing for electrification of transit. The Conservatives did nothing. Their record was not good. Canada has had the best plan in recent years for reducing emissions, and it's certainly no thanks to the Conservative Party. They have no plan for the environment, no plan to protect Canadians, and no plan for national security. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. I think the minister should read the Commissioner of the Environment's report. It's clear. Reductions are not attributable to any steps taken by the government. The Liberal environment policy is not a policy. It's just a plan for the environment. It's just a plan to tax. The Liberals, Canada under the Liberals has the worst record for emissions reductions. When will the government stop punishing Canadians so that we can finally cut taxes after an election? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. It's incredible what the Conservatives are willing to say. They've got their heads in the sand. Insurable costs for Canadians for the impact of climate change were $7 billion in June and August. It's unprecedented. And what would the Conservatives do? Just let the planet burn. They have no plan to fight climate change, no plan to create jobs in the 21st century economy, no plan to protect Canadians, their drinking water and their health. It's a true disgrace. Before I turn the floor over to the Honourable Member for La Prairie, I'd just like to remind members not to talk while the Speaker has the floor. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, what farmers feared has happened in the Senate. Senator Peter Harder tabled an amendment to C-282 that prevents the bill from protecting supply management. Harder's amendment renders the bill inoperative for all renegotiations of existing trade deals. In other words, the Senate is doing Donald Trump a favor. He wants to attack supply management as soon as 2026 by renegotiating CUSMA. Peter Harder and Peter Boehm don't work for our agriculture. They work for Trump. Will the leader ask senators to defeat the amendment? The Honourable Government House Leader in the House. Government House Leader. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We agree with the bloc. Bill C-282 on protecting supply management is important, and I'm disappointed with the Senatorial Committee who voted against the bill and who moved that amendment. And I would call on senators to respect the will of the House, and I would call on all senators to vote against the amendments and to support our farmers who are there to feed Canadians and who contribute a lot to our economy. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Senators Harder and Beam confirmed that from the outset, all they wanted to do was kill C-282. Their amendment virtually guarantees that supply management will be sacrificed again in the CUSMA renegotiation with Trump. They're attacking the all-party vote of this place. They're attacking 6,000 companies and 100,000 jobs in Quebec. They want to weaken our regions, ruin our producers, and weaken our agricultural model. I call on the leader, but this applies to all parties. Will the Senate leader ask senators to vote against this sabotage? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, indeed, we are calling on senators to support the bill in its original form. It's very important to support and protect supply management. That has been the Liberal Party and government's commitment. We created supply management, and we will keep defending it. And I hope that the Conservative Party will also encourage Conservative senators to vote in favour of the bill in its original form. The Honourable Member for La Rosemont, La Petite Patrie. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal government's record on the environment is pathetic. We're in a climate crisis, and the Liberals aren't getting the job done. The minister announced regulations to cap emissions from the oil and gas sector that'll take effect in 2030 in order to reach our 2030 targets. Today, the Commissioner of the Environment just confirmed that the Liberal plan isn't working. In fact, Canada comes in last in the G7. Will the minister finally do his job, or should he go back to climbing the CN Tower? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Mr. Speaker, I would encourage my honourable colleague from Rosemont, La Petite Patrie, to truly read the Environment Commissioner's report. It shows that Canada's measures are working. We have the best performance from 2017 to 2021 among G7 countries. It's true the Conservatives hadn't done a very good job before that, so it was an easy act to follow. But this is the first time in Canadian history that greenhouse gas emissions have been going down when the economy is going full tilt. And that's thanks to the system we put in place.
Lady Smith.
Canadians deserve better than that excuse. Mr. Speaker, another climate report, another massive Liberal failure. Canadians are terrified of the impacts of the climate crisis. They need action. But today's report has given the Liberals a failing grade. We have the worst climate record in the G7, while this government caves to the biggest and richest polluters. And the Conservatives, well, they will always put the interests of the rich before the planet.
Absolutely.
When are the Liberals going to stop putting oil and gas CEOs ahead of Canadians?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
One of the key measures, Mr. Speaker, of our climate change plan is putting a price on pollution. And on May 8th, the member from Rosemont-La Petite Patrie said, and I quote, "This is why New Democrats, as progressive and environmentalists, are in favor of putting a price on pollution." Well, Mr. Speaker, I guess that under the pressure from the Conservative Party of Canada, the NDP are no longer progressives and they're no longer environmentalists. On this side of the House, we will continue to fight for climate change. We will continue to fight for Canadians.
The honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Last week, the government's own data revealed that oil and gas is the only sector of the economy showing signs of life. And on Monday, the NDP Liberals announced a job-killing cap on oil and gas production. The government's own analysis admits that their cap on production will cost thousands of jobs and billions of dollars, destroying Canadian paychecks. No wonder Canadian-based Enbridge is building a $700 million pipeline in the United States. Wow. This Prime Minister is creating powerful paychecks for American energy workers and American steel workers, while Canadian workers can't afford their food or rent. Why is this Prime Minister driving investment jobs away from Canada towards the United States?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, what the member is saying is simply false. It's a cap on pollution. Pollution is a bad thing, something the Conservative Party of Canada should understand. You want to talk about investment? Let's talk about a $2 billion investment that Strathcona, an oil company in Alberta, is making in Canada to make sure that workers in Alberta and the energy sector can have a future in a carbon-constrained world, something the Conservative Party of Canada is incapable of understanding, Mr. Speaker.
Colleagues, especially when the Speaker stands up and the House is quieting, that's not the time to interfere. I'll ask the Honourable Member as well from Edmonton Manning, please, to allow the responses to be given until the Honourable Member is recognised. The Honourable Member from Battle River Crowfoot.
Mr. Speaker, that minister may not understand how the energy industry works, but Canadians do. Regardless of the name, this cap is going to drive investment out of Canada, costing Canadians their jobs. It's been 9 long years of a Liberal government bent on destroying the Canadian energy sector, despite the industry being the biggest driver of the Canadian economy and employing hundreds of thousands of Canadian workers. So I'll ask the question again. Why is that extremist minister and that Prime Minister helping Donald Trump create American jobs?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Foreign direct investment, Mr. Speaker, is up in Canada. Investors are coming to Canada because we provide stability. We provide opportunity. Mr. Speaker, Canada has a long-standing history of standing up and protecting Canadian workers. And when it comes to the last NAFTA negotiations, it was the Conservative Party of Canada that asked us to back down. Well, we didn't, Mr. Speaker. We stood up for steel workers. We stood up for our auto workers. We stood up for our agricultural workers and our farmers, Mr. Speaker, and we'll do it again.
The Honourable Member from Cypress Hills, the Honourable Member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Speaker, after 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost as they continue to crush the Canadian energy sector. This week, they announced their job-killing oil and gas production cap. Enbridge, a company based in Calgary, is taking their $700 million investment out of Canada to build a pipeline in America. That's jobs and powerful paychecks for American pipeliners, for American engineers, and for American truckers. Why is the Prime Minister so focused on creating powerful paychecks for Americans and not for Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Salt experts that disagree with them, but recently their go-to guy, Sylvain Charlebois, said climate change is the agri-food sector's greatest challenge and agreed that climate change is a major driver of food price inflation. So if Conservatives actually cared about elevated food prices, they'd have a plan to address climate change, but they don't. They've got nothing. No plan to address the biggest challenge in the agri-food sector. No plan to address the biggest driver of food price inflation. Now, are they going to start attacking this expert too?
The honourable member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Mr. Speaker, it's time for the Liberals to get back to the real world where Canadians are struggling to eat, heat, and house themselves. While the minister tries to claim that the production cap is going to create thousands of jobs, his own department is saying that's going to cost the Canadian economy billions of dollars and that we're going to lose thousands of jobs. The Canadian oil and gas industry already provides powerful paychecks for our people. So why is the Prime Minister so hell-bent on destroying those powerful paychecks and giving them to Americans?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance.
We love powerful paychecks, Mr. Speaker. Actually, wages have outpaced inflation
you love your own
in Canada
paycheck.
for the last 20 months, Mr. Speaker. The member opposite wants to talk about the United States. Well, I've got some information for him. Last week, the economist David Rosenberg said U.S.-based investors should strongly consider moving from New York to Toronto, Mr. Speaker. Now, I am not a Leafs fan, Mr. Speaker, but I happen to agree with that economist, and I
Nobody
know that
cares if you're a Leafs
investors
fan or not.
right around the world are looking to Canada.
The honourable member from Edmonton, Wetaskiwin.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, the NDP Liberal government is not worth the cost. The government's own analysis admits that their cap on production will cost Canadians thousands of jobs and billions of dollars. Meanwhile, we have a Canadian company who can't get a pipeline approved in Canada, investing $700 million in a U.S. project. And get this, in 2023, they increased oil and gas imports to Canada with over 40 million barrels shipped across the Atlantic from Nigeria and Saudi Arabia alone. Why is this Prime Minister so intent on funding powerful paychecks in the U.S. and everywhere else while Canadians struggle to afford food and housing?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Innovation.
Speaker, I know Conservatives like to cherry-pick per capita measures that try and talk down the Canadian economy. But in fact, if you look at per capita foreign direct investment, Canada is #1 in the world, ahead of Brazil, ahead of the United States. If you look at the IMF's projections of growth in Canada, our GDP is projected to grow more in the year 2025 than any other G7 country. We will not apologize on this side of the House for being optimistic about Canada's future.
The honourable member for Coast of Bay, Central, Notre Dame.
After 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost, especially for Newfoundland and Labrador's offshore oil and gas industry, where for the second year in a row, there were no bids for new exploration licenses. Energy NL says it was not unexpected, pointing to a complex, inconsistent, and burdensome regulatory system, including the only emissions cap in the world. So, Mr. Speaker, will these economic assassins get rid of that stupid cap so that we can export Canadian oil and gas instead of jobs?
I'd like to encourage members to be judicious in their use of language. The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
50%, Mr. Speaker, 50% higher. Now, what is that, Mr. Speaker? It's the imports of foreign oil into Canada when the Conservatives were in government than we are, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to standing up for our industries, whether it's the energy sector, whether it's steel workers, whether it's agricultural workers, Mr. Speaker, there is one party in this House that does that consistently. It is the Liberal Party of Canada. The Conservatives say, give it all away, and we will not do that. We will always stand up for Canadians, our workers, and our economy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Lac-Saint-Jean. The Liberals claim they're prepared for a wave of immigration caused by Donald Trump's deportation threats. But to be ready, you'd have to be watching the borders. Under the Safe Third Country Agreement, anyone who crosses the border secretly can make a refugee claim in Canada after 14 days. However, since the end of Roxham Road, the vast majority of RCMP officers have been redeployed. While there were 100 of them at the time to cover 160 kilometers around Roxham Road. Radio-Canada revealed that as of June 29th, there are now only 6 of them left. How many border agents are there today? The Honourable Minister of National Security. Mr. Speaker, the RCMP Commissioner and the Quebec Commander were both very clear. There has been no reduction in RCMP staffing in Quebec. In fact, we've invested more in the RCMP and CBSA. I have every confidence in their ability to deal with any contingency at any time. That's their job, to be ready and to foresee circumstances at the border. That's precisely what they're doing. We have to have confidence in their preparation and in their work. The Honourable Member for Avignon, Lamitis, Matane, Matapédia. Mr. Speaker, Quebec is so concerned that they're considering policing the border themselves. This morning in committee, the Minister of Public Security told me he was surprised that François Legault would want to send officers to the border because it's purely and completely a federal responsibility. Well, that's the problem. It's federal jurisdiction, but the feds don't seem to have a plan for the border. Nature abhors a vacuum, so with the federal government nowhere to be seen at the borders, Quebec needs to react. What's the plan and how many more officers are being deployed? The Honourable Minister of National Security. Mr. Speaker, I greatly appreciate the question from my colleague. In fact, I enjoyed our exchange earlier in committee. We talked about this very question. I reassured the committee, and my colleague was there, that the RCMP and Border Services are ready for any contingency. There are plans in place. They've been there for months. I think we need to have confidence in them and understand that giving the details of operational plans for politicians to do that on the floor of the House of Commons would be very irresponsible. The Honourable Member for Avignon, Lamitis, Matane, Matapédia. As if there weren't already lots of reasons to doubt the federal government's readiness, listen to this. This morning in committee, the minister told me we shouldn't imagine hundreds of thousands of arrivals before that becomes a real threat. Mr. Speaker, he says he's ready to wait until it becomes a threat before doing anything. He even told us there was no hurry because Trump doesn't take office till January. Mr. Speaker, this isn't the National Improv League. It's government. It's their job to see crises coming. When are they going to do what needs doing? The Honourable Minister of Immigration and Citizenship. I thought the Bloc, and rightly so, was concerned about the CAQ policy of scaremongering. But here they are back at the charge. We have always been monitoring the borders, but I think everyone understands that it would be pretty amateurish of us to detail our plans here on the floor of the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, today Canada's Environment Commissioner proved the Liberals are fake environmentalists. That's right. In a damning report, it revealed the Liberals are not on track to meet their own emissions reductions targets, despite their plan to quadruple the carbon tax. According to the Commissioner, the Liberals are deceiving Canadians with, quote, unreliable emission reduction estimates. Wow. It's all pain, no gain. Why are the Liberals driving Canadians to food banks with their costly carbon tax with getting nothing in return?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, the Commissioner's report looks back at what's been happening since 1990. And you know what didn't happen under the Harper years, Mr. Speaker? Any type of action on climate change. No measures for energy efficiency. No measures for transit. No measures for electrification of transportation. No measures for renewable energy. This has changed since 2015, and we've bent the curves. We were going to miss our 2030 targets by at least 30%. We're 7% below 2005 levels. That's because of what we've been doing. It's about climate. It's about jobs, it's about the economy, and it's about the safety of Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Dauphin Swan River, Nipawin.
Mr. Speaker, we can't believe a word the Liberals say on environment. Right. Even the Environment Commissioner revealed the Liberals misled Canadians on their emission claims. Right. He stated, quote,
The recent decreases to projected 2030 emissions were not due to climate actions taken by government. While the Environment Minister punishes Canadians with a carbon tax, Canada's worst record in the G7 for emissions reductions under the Liberals. Now that the truth has been exposed by the Commissioner, will the Prime Minister call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for the Environment.
And what the Auditor General confirmed is that Canada's emissions are down below levels that we haven't seen since the mid-1990s. And we've proposed more measures to drive our emissions down, and the Conservatives want to work against us. What the Conservatives have confirmed today is they don't work for Canadians, they don't care about the environment, they don't listen to science, and they want our emissions to go up, Mr. Speaker. The failed former leader from Regina Capel has said repeatedly that our emissions are superior to other countries, and they should be driven up. We should be given that permission to produce more greenhouse gas emissions than other countries, Mr. Speaker. Not on this side of the House. We believe in science, and we're fighting climate change.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, the carbon tax is going up. Greenhouse gas emissions are also going up. The Liberals have put in place a tax plan, not an environmental plan. And since the carbon tax, Canada has fallen to near last place among OECD countries for emissions. Meanwhile, the Environment Minister is burning fossil fuels to attend COP. When will there be an election? The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Oceans. Look, Mr. Speaker, I think we've already answered that question. But what Canadians would like to know is about the potential show of leadership when it comes to national security. And the question for the Conservative leader is, how is it that somebody who one day wants to be in charge of the Coast Guard can't even get a security clearance? What does he have to hide? What do they have to hide? What do they not want us to know, Mr. Speaker? They should do their job and get the security clearance.
The Honourable Member from Vancouver East.
A breeding ground for contemporary forms of slavery. That's what the United Nations call the Conservative and Liberal Temporary Foreign Worker Program. It's an immigration program that uses closed work permits that trap people to one employer. It abuses, exploits, and underpays migrant workers to help big businesses. It drives down wages and hurts everyone. It's just another initiative of Conservative and Liberals helping wealthy CEOs. Will the Liberals stop this exploitation of migrant workers by ending the closed work permit system? Yes or no?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, the mistreatment and abuse of temporary foreign workers is unacceptable. Everyone deserves to work in safe, healthy, and dignified conditions. Under our watch, we have mandated employers provide all TFWs with information about their rights in Canada, prohibited reprisal by employers against workers who come forward with complaints, and prohibited employers from charging recruitment fees to workers. And in Budget 2024, Mr. Speaker, we are investing $41 million to ensure that TFWs know their rights by funding community organizations. We know there is more work to do.
Yeah, cut him off.
I ask once again all members, especially the member who just asked the question from Vancouver East, to please not take the floor unless recognized by the chair. The honourable member from Churchill-Kuwatanuck-Aski.
Mr. Speaker, Barons River First Nation still does not have clean drinking water. The water treatment plant is over a year behind schedule, and the community has been forced to haul water over 300 kilometers by truck every time, costing thousands of dollars. The lack of clean water has impacted dialysis patients, the health of children, elders, the whole community. And yet the Liberals aren't keeping on top of the contractor who hasn't gotten the job done. They're not funding the equipment the First Nation has asked for. Once again, the Liberals are failing First Nations on clean water. What are they going to do to deliver clean water to Barons River now?
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
I want to thank the members of the INAN Committee who passed a government amendment declaring a human right to clean drinking water on First Nation. Historic for this country, Mr. Speaker. And I really hope the member opposite will help ensure that we have smooth passage of this bill through this House and into Senate so we can get this law in place and protect water for generations to come. And I also want to congratulate 2 of the First Nations in her own riding who just recently received funding for K-12 schools. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You didn't answer the question.
The Honourable Member from Egmont.
Mr. Speaker, one of the most difficult tasks faced by our government was to repair Veterans Affairs Canada after all the damage done by the former Conservative government. I know that it was tough to fix, but I also know that many hard-working public servants at Veterans Affairs headquarters on Prince Edward Island are proud to make a positive impact once again. As that most solemn of days approaches, November the 11th, will the Minister of Agriculture share with this House how our government has been helping to make a difference in the lives of veterans and their families?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable colleague from Egmont for his question. And as you're aware, Mr. Speaker, the former Conservative Government of Canada slashed funding from the Department of Veterans Affairs, slashed hurt veterans, and closed 9 Veterans Affairs offices right across the country that serve veterans right across this country. Since we formed the government, Mr. Speaker, we have invested over $11 billion in veteran support and have opened the 9 offices across this country. Veterans can be assured that our government, the Liberal government, will continue to support veterans right across the country.
The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
MP Barrett.
Revelations in court filings show that there's another lawsuit against the Liberal minister from Edmonton showing that he broke the law. This one shows that his shady company and his business partner, well, he's now been directly named in this lawsuit in their search for buyers. Quote, they're going to sell this. I just updated Felix and Randy. And quote, are you confident? Really? I won't tell Shauna, Felix and Randy yet. After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, they're not worth the cost or the corruption. So will the Liberal minister from Edmonton stand up and admit to Canadians that he broke the law?
Yeah. The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, this issue has been dealt with by the Ethics Commissioner, who has cleared that member on 3 occasions. When it comes to his former business partner, we agree with this House. He should have been clear and answered those questions, and now he will face those consequences. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
She needs to speak up.
The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Canadians can't believe a word from these Liberals when it comes to this scandal. We know that the Cabinet Minister was sitting around the table while his company was applying for federal government contracts, and we know that his business lied before a parliamentary committee. But there's more explosive reporting today about the Liberal Minister from Edmonton and his company fraudulently applying for government contracts. Now, experts are saying that if this is proven to be true, that the Prime Minister should expel the Minister from Cabinet. Conservatives are saying we should call the cops. So will the Prime Minister fire him today or wait till he's dragged out in handcuffs?
Here, here. Here, here. Randy's not even a good liar. At least if you're going to steal.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
He can't even lie well enough
Speaker, the member opposite is making reference to an article that came out today, and I can assure everyone in this House and those watching that the article confirms that the company in question has never received any contracts as an Indigenous business and has never been listed on the Indigenous Business Directory. And our focus is on building up Indigenous businesses and entrepreneurs through procurement. We're not going to let any members across the way try to block the progress to achieving economic reconciliation, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to work with Indigenous partners to reduce the barriers and increase participation in federal procurement.
Order. The Honourable Member from Sturgeon River, Parkland.
Mr. Speaker, Indigenous people are outraged that government contracts meant for Indigenous businesses
are being scooped up by shady companies with no Indigenous connection. Today we learned that the Minister of Employment's fraud-ridden company, Global Health Imports, claimed to be Indigenous in order to try and secure millions in lucrative government contracts. Now, this all happened while the Minister of Employment was actively running the company. It's time to end the charade. When will the minister admit that he is the real Randy and acknowledge that it's wrong to falsely claim Indigenous heritage and take contracts meant for Indigenous peoples and resign?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Procurement Services.
Speaker, we're taking every effort to ensure that Indigenous people are properly associated with the contracts that are procured. That's why we've established the very motion that's going forward. Members opposite want to criticize and be critical of the program, but it's essential to ensure that Indigenous people have the right, have the ability for economic success and integration so that they too can succeed, and that we understand that those on the Indigenous list are managed appropriately, and the procurement process is also taking transparent measures forward.
The Honourable Member from Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock.
Speaker, today it was revealed that a company co-owned by the Employment Minister bid on federal contracts while claiming to be Indigenous owned. The company, Global Health Imports, has 2 shareholders. Perhaps 3 if you count the other Randy. But according to the Assembly of First Nations, the Liberals' Indigenous procurement program is being abused by shell companies, with the vast majority of those federal contracts going to non-Indigenous businesses. Will the Prime Minister listen to those leaders, call an investigation, and remove the minister from Cabinet until the inquiry is finished?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Services and Procurement.
The article makes it very clear the association that was being referenced here did not get a contract. They were not listed on the Indigenous list, and we've taken the steps appropriately in the procurement to ensure that that doesn't happen, Mr. Speaker.
Order.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. There's what the government does, and then says, and then there's the facts. And unfortunately, these two things don't often correspond. The Environment Commissioner's reports are very hard to read. I would invite the Honourable Member for Jonquière to start again from the top, please. There's what the government says, and then there's the facts. And unfortunately, these two things don't often correspond. The Environment Commissioner's reports make tough reading. And despite what the minister claims, the Liberals' record is really not good. This government takes the survival of threatened species lightly. And when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, well, Canada is the worst in the G7 when it comes to meeting its targets. The Liberals have quit. Are they really ready to leave biodiversity and the fight against climate change to the Conservatives? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my colleague knows how much respect I have for him, but you know, a good part of his party is allied with the Conservative Party to bring down the government to prevent a cap on emissions in the oil and gas sector. They want to prevent us from putting in place a law to protect nature. And when we came to power in 2015, Mr. Speaker, Canada didn't protect even 1% of our oceans and our coasts. We're up to 16% today. We'll be at 30% in 2030, as we promised in Montreal at COP15.
For the second time today, I'm going to ask the Honourable Member from Miramichi Grand Lake to please not take the floor unless recognized by the Chair.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Canada has just 6 years to meet its greenhouse gas emissions target of 45% under 2005 levels. 6 years. According to the Environment Commissioner, Canada has only reduced emissions by 7.1% as of 2022. That's a terrible record. By the time the federal government wakes up, all the forests will have burned and all the glaciers will have melted. 7.1%, that's not even a sixth of the goal. And, I mean, come on, Mr. Speaker, do they really want to leave the future of the planet in the hands of the Conservatives and their friends in the oil and gas sector?
Did you just say all the forests will burn and all the glaciers will melt?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind my colleague that when we came to power in 2015, the projections were that Canada was going to miss its 2030 target by at least 30%. We have flattened the curve, and as of 2022, we were at 7.1% under 2005 levels. That's the difference between the two. It's like the equivalent of adding 79 million cars to Canada's roads with, pollution. We didn't do that because of our plan, and I look forward to working with my colleagues so that Canada can do more to fight climate change.
The Honourable Member for Banff-Airdrie.
After 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost of housing, and veterans who fought for our country are feeling the pinch more than anyone. Sadly, veterans are 3 times more likely to become homeless. And a recent study indicates that there's 4 times more homeless veterans than the government claims. As many as 10,000 homeless veterans, in fact. Terrible. That's 10,000 too many. Yeah. So how can the government who caused the problem and who won't even admit the extent of the problem be trusted to fix the problem?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, the cost of sending our citizens to war includes the cost of taking care of them when they come home. That's why we have moved forward with programs that are designed to actually ensure that communities have the capacity to provide housing to those who have put their lives at risk in order to protect our country overseas and at home. Mr. Speaker, I recently was able to work with the Canadian Alliance to end homelessness, to scale up a program that has ended functional homelessness for veterans in 3 communities across this country so they can expand it to 26 additional cities. We've also worked very closely with community organizations across this country, and what's disappointing, Mr. Speaker, when it came time to put your position on the record, the Conservatives voted against these programs.
The Honourable Member for Banff-Airdrie.
Well, the number of homeless veterans just keeps going up, so obviously the photo ops and press releases aren't getting the job done, Mr. Speaker. The Veterans Association Food Bank in Calgary reports that in the last 6 months alone, their numbers have tripled in what they're spending to keep veterans housed, clothed, and fed. Veterans served our country, and they deserve better than the homelessness and hunger that they're getting from this NDP Liberal government. Veterans, like all Canadians, can't afford the cost. So when will the Prime Minister call a carbon tax election so veterans can finally get the respect they deserve?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Veterans
We're
Affairs.
not going to take any lessons from the Conservatives. They shut down 9 Veterans Affairs offices. We opened 9, plus another one in my hometown of Surrey Centre. They laid off 1,000 Veterans Affairs officers who are there to help veterans get the services they need. We reinstated those services. We've created services to help those veterans get the needs that they need, and we will continue to do so going forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, at Chemin-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Liberal government, the cost of rent and housing has gone up. It's doubled, and homelessness is up. The Bloc has supported the Liberals for 2 non-confidence votes. The Conservatives are calling for cutting the GST on new homes, and we've heard from many who feel that the Conservative leader's plan is a step in the right direction. Will the Liberal Bloc cut the GST on housing, or is it going to continue to fund its programs that build 0 new homes? The Honourable Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities. Honestly, Mr. Speaker, as the member knows very well, we are making investments to build affordable housing. Just as an example, in the Housing Accelerator Fund, we have an agreement underway with Quebec to build 8,000 social housing units. The Conservatives are against that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, they talk about when we cut GST for apartment rent, the Conservatives for building apartments, the Conservatives were against that. The Conservatives' leaders' strategy is just to cut, and that's unacceptable.
The honourable member for Davenport.
Mr. Speaker, cities like Toronto are on the front lines when it comes to responding to the housing crisis. That's why last year we announced a $500 million federal investment in Toronto through the Housing Accelerator Fund to unlock over 53,000 new homes over the next decade. Last week, the Conservative leader announced a plan that will impact home building in Toronto by making dangerous cuts to housing investments. People in my constituency of Davenport can't afford these kinds of enormous Conservative housing cuts. To the Minister of Housing, how can we stop these Conservative cuts and solve the housing crisis for Canadians?
Really good question.
Thank you very much.
Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
I want to offer a couple of points. First, I want to thank my colleague for her advocacy for her community to receive funding through the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is delivering hundreds of millions of dollars for housing in Toronto. Fascinating, Mr. Speaker, is the Conservative strategy, which is now to forbid their MPs from advocating for their communities. On this side of the House, we have community advocates who will stand up so their communities get the funding they need. Second, we know that actually building homes takes investments. That's why we're putting money into the system to help build affordable housing, to help reduce barriers to construction. But third, Mr. Speaker, the Conservative strategy is to cut billions of dollars from housing. That simply isn't going to work.
Can I ask the honourable member from Kingston and the Islands to please, if he wishes to have a conversation, to have it offline. À l'ordre, s'il vous plaît.
Order, please.
The honourable member from Durham.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's failed gun policies are putting Toronto at risk. This year, there have been 126 more shootings in Toronto compared to last year, and Peel Regional Police report seizing one illegal firearm every 36 hours. The Liberal MPs who were elected from the Toronto area should be here making noise about these problems, but they're silent. And why are they silent, Mr. Speaker? Because they've decided to back up the Prime Minister's failed policies. When will they stop choosing the Prime Minister over the people?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, our position as a Liberal Party, my position as a Toronto MP is simple. Let's keep the citizens of our cities safe. How do we do that? By ensuring that we have less gun violence on our streets. How do we do that? By shoring up our borders to prevent guns from crossing the border. The specific border services that party cut when they were in power prior to 2015. What we also do is we recognize the important impact on domestic violence that gunfare has. When we keep guns out of the homes in people in cities in Canada, what we're doing is ensuring that domestic violence doesn't have a pernicious impact on women. That's how you keep Canadians safe.
The honourable member from Durham.
I want my friends and neighbours in Toronto to take note. This Liberal Justice Minister is looking back at things that happened over 10 years ago, while he's been here for 9 years and takes zero responsibility for crime getting worse. Imagine that, getting elected to serve your constituents, sitting here for 9 years and can't take a single bit of responsibility for a problem that he should be trying to fix. Mr. Speaker, it's very, very clear. Crime is worse. The Liberal MPs elected to serve Toronto are failing to do their job. When will they stop choosing the Prime Minister over the people?
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. Well said. Well said.
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, our government works very effectively with law enforcement professionals across the country, including the regional police, the Peel Regional Police that my colleague referred to, the City of Toronto, the York Regional Police. We've invested, Mr. Speaker, money that the Conservatives cut in the RCMP and border services to prevent illegal guns from entering the country. And, Mr. Speaker, we're very surprised the Conservative Party would turn back gun control legislation designed to protect Canadians by making it legal again to have assault-style firearms on the streets of the country.
The honourable member from Niagara Falls.
Speaker, after 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost, corruption or crime. Since 2015, when they formed government, violent crime has skyrocketed by 50%. And sadly, during their reign of error, they have also allowed an evil monster, Paul Bernardo, to be transferred to a medium security institution. On November 26th, this child rapist and serial killer is scheduled to have a parole hearing. Will this NDP Liberal Prime Minister finally get tough on crime and assure Canadians that Paul Bernardo will remain behind bars where he belongs for the rest of his life?
Here. Why is Paul Bernardo having a parole hearing?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
What the heck is going on in
Speaker,
Canada?
I think it's important for all members in this House not to use the name of some of the most notorious killers in the country to give them the exact publicity that they crave. This particular individual is locked up in a federal prison behind 2 very high fences with a lot of razor wire. Mr. Speaker, I saw myself the secure federal correctional facility that this particular individual is in. My colleague also knows the parole board is independent, and it would be absolutely inappropriate to prejudge their work, but I have confidence that they'll do their work properly for public safety.
If he gets out, that's incredibly so bad for the Liberals. It's just so bad.
The Honourable Member for Halifax West.
Speaker, this summer, millions of Canadians tuned into CBC to cheer on Team Canada at the Olympic and Paralympic Games in Paris. Canadian athletes pushed limits, set new records, and showed us the unifying power of sport. Many of these trained at Canadian Sport Institute Atlantic in Halifax West. Canada's athletes give it their all to represent our country, so we're going to keep supporting them with more pay for more athletes as they train to represent Canada. Can the Minister of Sport and Physical Activity tell us how we're going to support these athletes so they can keep representing Canada with pride and excellence?
The Honourable Minister for Sport and Physical Activity.
Mr. Speaker, the Paris 2024 Games were extraordinary. Canadians cheered on our Olympic and Paralympic teams as records were broken, medals were won, and history was made. The journey from playground to podium is long and it's hard, and our athletes train for years. Our Liberal government is proud to support over 1,900 athletes through the Athlete Assistance Program, and we're also proud to be increasing this program to provide more money for more athletes. An additional $7 million a year means a 23% in the living allowance and an additional 30% allowance for Paralympic athletes. By investing in Canadian athletes, we're inspiring the next generation and building a stronger, united Canada.
The Honourable Member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Mr. Speaker, homelessness is growing amongst seniors for the first time ever. Canadian seniors who live on fixed incomes are being hit hardest by skyrocketing rents driven by unregulated corporate greed. The Liberals have sat by while private investors jack up their rents and squeeze our parents, grandparents, and veterans out of their homes. When will the Liberals stop caving to corporate landlords and private long-term care investors to protect seniors?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable colleague for her question, and I share her concern about the plight of some of Canada's most vulnerable, those without a roof over their head. In order to address those challenges, we need to ensure that we build out the affordable housing stock so people can find a place that is safe, that they can afford. That's why we're moving forward with billions of dollars of investments to help build affordable housing in this country at a pace that is not seen in many decades. It's why we put money on the table to support nonprofits to buy up existing affordable housing that exists in the market to ensure that it remains affordable forever, and it's why we have restored, after decades of cuts, more investments in cooperative and affordable housing. We'll continue to do what it takes to ensure every Canadian.
The Honourable Member for Spadina, Fort York.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians will soon pause to remember the brave men and women of Canada's armed forces who served our country and made the ultimate sacrifice. Whether in Flanders, on Juno Beach, the hills of Korea, or the sands of Afghanistan, they fought for Canada, for our democracy, and the freedoms that we all enjoy today. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to wear this country's uniform. I believe in our democratic institutions. I believe all members of this House are duty-bound to accept and hold high the torch passed from those fallen in the defense of Canada. Mr. Speaker, I respectfully ask the government if they all can say the same.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Veterans Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, we all admire the sacrifice and service that veterans have given to us. I think that question was quite out of line. However, as it is Veterans Week, I think it does deserve to remember and commend all the veterans who have sacrificed their lives, given back for our freedoms, and protected the democratic processes that we have today. We will always remember them not only on Veterans Week, but every day of this year. Thank you.
I see that the honourable member from Cowichan Malahat Langford is rising on a point of order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, there have been consultations, and I hope that if you seek it, you will find consent for the following motion. That the House, 1, recognizes that attacks on places of worship threaten all Canadians' charter-protected right to freedom of worship. 2, recognizes the recent increases in attacks targeting places of worship. 3, calls for the government to work urgently with...
I'm afraid I'm hearing a number of no's for the honourable member's request for unanimous consent.
Okay, so that's it for question period. As you guys see here, there's a link. I'm going to put this link up at the top and pin it. That's for committee, and we'll be going there live in about an hour and 15 minutes. One thing before we go, I did want to touch base on the African Union Commission, if I said that right. It looks like they just, MP Jolie and Mary Ng and a couple other people. I don't think Trudeau's here, but let's see what they have to say, how much money they're giving away.
I would just first and foremost start by talking about the work we're doing here, and I'll be speaking in French and English. So if you don't have translation, please do so. Donc, j'étais content de revoir le président.
I was very pleased to see.
Sure, we can address biological threats. We know that they follow no borders, so we will be working with dozens of countries in Africa to make sure that we're putting in place the best practices. Now, as part of our announcements also for our future Africa strategy, it is a pleasure for me to tell you that we will be increasing our presence in Africa because Canada will be showing Africans how much we believe in the work they're doing and how much our relationship is strong. So we're creating a position of a new special envoy for Africa. We're creating a position also for a new special envoy for the Sahel region. Well, there are many conflicts in the region, and we want to work on peace and security. And finally, we're increasing our diplomatic footprint by opening an embassy in Zambia and in Benin. So these are some of the first deliverables that are part of our new Africa strategy. So thank you so much. And now I'll pass the mic to my friend and colleague, Mary Ng, the Minister of International Trade. Thank you.
Let me go back a little bit because she was talking about announcements there. Did she announce anything like money related, or we're just building more diplomacies and things like that?
They follow no borders, so is at the table and also supporting survivors of sexual violence. The second initiative is about counterterrorism and criminal threats. Then Minister Ng, Minister Hussein, my parliamentary secretary, also Rob Oliphant. We want to have stronger cooperation with the African Union itself and also stronger bilateral relationships with many African countries. Alors, on travaille présentement sur une nouvelle stratégie pour l'Afrique.
Working on this new strategy for Africa, we are part of the Francophonie and also part of the Commonwealth.
Announced $54.4 million.
There it is.
To support.
There it is, $54.4 million. There it is. All right, that's all I wanted to know. I don't need to listen to them talk for half an hour. I'm sure you guys don't want to listen to MP Jolie talk. I just wanted to see how much money we're giving away today. Just every day, it's always another 50 million here, 100 million here, a couple 100 million here. Just I don't know, man. We got problems at home we got to deal with. Yeah, so for what? Here, we'll see for what.
3 key initiatives. One that is about peace building and conflict prevention in Sudan. We need to protect civilians. We need to make sure that We're creating the conditions for peace by bringing Sudanese society voices at the table and also supporting survivors of sexual violence. The second initiative is about counterterrorism and criminal threats, particularly in West Africa. We'll be working out of Morocco, and we'll be working with the UN Office on counterterrorism and also the RCMP to make sure that we address the terrorism threat not only in Africa but also here, because we know that we need to protect Canadians at all time. And finally, talking about
Okay, and then the third thing is what we listened at the beginning, is she's building more diplomacy places, like more embassies. Oh, so you know what that means? We're going to get a couple more Tom Clarks that are going to get fancy consulate general places and all that, because, you know, with every embassy comes more consulate generals and comes more needing for housing for them. So some of that 54.5 million, I think it was, she said 54.5, is definitely going towards embassies building the buildings itself, and then actually getting housing for the consulate generals to live near it. So I wonder what liberal insider is going to get that nice new condo and how much we're paying for it. But anyway, we've got a little bit of a break. We've got an hour until the next committee, so I encourage everyone to take that hour and let's go get food, do what you got to do, and tune in for the committee, because we won't be live tomorrow. We'll be live on Monday, I believe. I just have to check the calendar. Let me just check the calendar. Yeah, so they don't sit next week. They have next week off. Is there a holiday this weekend? Don't they usually sit for the 11th, November 11th? Remembrance Day? Oh, they get the whole week off for Remembrance Day. That's what it is. Yeah, but I thought they sat last week for... I'm pretty sure they did. I'm pretty sure they sat last week during Remembrance Day, if I'm not mistaken. I guess they decided this year they get the whole week off for Remembrance Day. I could be wrong on that, though. But, yes, Remembrance Day is the 11th. Yes, sorry. It came off the top of my head right away as soon as... Hello, it's November 11th, you moron. I know. As soon as I said that, I remembered right away. It didn't take me more than like 30 seconds. Okay? I don't forget, but yes, they get the whole week off, so we won't be live next week. It's constituency week next week, yes, which is what they call it, but it's really just for them to have a whole week off. I mean, the only real work that they do during constituency week is making phone calls and reading emails and door knocking, which, as far as I'm concerned, I could name at least 50 MPs that haven't been to their constituents, like haven't actually, because they don't have to live there, they haven't actually been back to where they represent in like years. Like Kevin Lomo is a really good example. He hasn't been to his riding in, I don't know, that guy still lives in the basement of the House of Commons. So anyway, look, that's all I'm saying there is that we won't be live next week, so just tune in for the last live stream this week. And you guys know I don't go live on Fridays, so if you want to watch the house, you can go ahead and watch it at some point tomorrow if you want. But Fridays are always a half day, so just know we're going to be coming back on, what's the week after that? Is the week of the 18th, is Monday the 18th is when we'll be live again. So I'll definitely be getting clips out next week, and I'll be getting stuff out this weekend and stuff like that. So, because obviously Trudeau and Liberal MPs and ministers are going to be doing stuff. So if you want to just go ahead and check the channel over next week and catch up to see what's going on to stay informed, then definitely do that. But for now, we're going to call it here, and that's it for question period. So I appreciate everybody tuning in, and everybody have a good rest of your evening. You know, we're going to be live again in an hour, so just go ahead and click that link up at the top. I believe I can put it here in chat again, so there it is. And then that'll be it until, the 18th for live streams. So see you guys in committee. Take a break. If not, then I'll see you in a week. So cheers, guys, and see you soon.